Hey, it's Sammy for another episode of the I Do Music podcast, and our goal and our mission is to empower and educate musicians and artists worldwide. And on today's episode, we sat down with visual artist Mr. Soul, discussing how he discovered his love for art through graffiti, moving to Atlanta with dreams of working with Organized Noise, and his work with City of Ink over the years. Hey, it's Sammy for another episode of the I Do Music podcast, and I'm sitting down with extraordinary graphic artist, designer, visual artist, all of the things, Mr. Soul.
Good afternoon. Very, very, very honored to be here in this seat.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, from the logo that I'm staring at to some of like the greatest book covers and designs and companies you've been able to work with over the years, I'm honored to have you sitting here and just like get a different perspective of, you know, your impact on this like music entertainment industry even.
Right.
So yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into the
here for
story.
it. Let's do it.
First off, Mr. Soul. Where did the name Mr. Soul come from? Because I mean, when you look, for those that aren't familiar, first off, he created the logo for Patchwork. Correct? Did you create that logo?
I did not create the original logo that we're looking at. When I came to Patchwork in '97, that was already there.
Gotcha.
But there was no one in the studio handling
the
the branding and brand identity. So when I came to Atlanta in November of '96, and this was back when there was no internet, no email. So I'm a fan of music, so whenever I would buy music, I would always look at the credits to see who the art director was, the photographer was, and where the music was recorded. Mm-hmm. So when I got ready to move to Atlanta, I looked to see where all the Outkast stuff was recorded, all of the LaFace stuff, and all points led to Patchwork. So when I got down here, I popped open the Yellow Pages, and I called all the studios in Atlanta, and I got an invitation to come from BJ Kerr, who was the president of Patchwork's label at the time. They had Razzcast, Voodoo, and Mean Green. So BJ invited me in to check out my portfolio, and that's pretty much how it started. Now, the name, before I moved to Atlanta, the name of my company was Visual Soul. Mm-hmm. And then I had an OG DJ that I used to do work for. So his way of greeting me was, "What's up, Mr. Soul?" It was his way of greeting me as an individual and as a company. Mm-hmm. So I never thought much of it. I thought it was cool, but I never embodied it until when I moved to Atlanta, and then I met BJ, and I was doing work with Patchwork. One day I walked in, and he greeted me the same way, and I don't know where he got it from. So I had to own it.
Yeah, you had to embrace it at that point. I mean, but looking at, like I said, I mean, I looked at this logo and I was thinking, I wasn't aware that you didn't do that one, but looking at your work though, it all has like a very soulful, like it embodies what you create. And so I think that it's just a fitting name.
Well, that has a lot to do with it. The reason why I adopted it, because for me at that moment, it was a defining moment as to what I wanted my artwork to look like, how I wanted it to feel, and how I wanted it to touch people. Mm-hmm. And it was really like Organized Noise and Outkast. That music, that sound defined what I wanted my artwork to look like.
Gotcha.
So that's ultimately why I moved to Atlanta. I wanted to work with Organized Noise.
That's fire. And you were able to do that?
I was able to do that.
That's
and
dope.
Just yesterday, I had a cool meeting with Peaches.
Nice.
Who's like my big sister, and Sleepy keep up with me on Instagram. But that was definitely an honor to be able to come here and do that.
Exactly. Yeah, because you're back in Cleveland.
Yeah, I've been back in Cleveland. So October 2016, October 4th, I talked to my dad for his 69th birthday. And then Thursday, October 6th, I got a phone call that he was gone. And so I'm my mother's only child. At the time, I was already going home that Sunday because my mother was having a major surgery. So my mom was sick, Pops was gone, I'm the only child. So I had to shut down the Atlanta operation and like immediately go home. So I shut down 20 years of my life at that time and compressed that into 3 weeks, and I moved back to Cleveland.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you got to do what you got to do sometimes, and life comes at us fast, but I'm happy that you're back. I think sometimes too, it's always good to get back to your roots too, and just like, see like how far you have been able to come to.
Well, for me, it's always important to come to do this because, being back home, like when you've been somewhere for 20 years, building relationships, family and friends and stuff like that, and then you're uprooted from that, and then you got to go to a place like Cleveland.
Strange.
It's definitely a lot of I'm still working on that transition,
I'm
but
sure.
it's cool. Got to do what you got to do.
Right, absolutely. Now let's talk about how. So originally from Cleveland, Ohio.
Right.
Let's talk about how you discovered your love for design, the arts, being an artist. Like, were you just naturally always creative as a kid, painting things, drawing things? Like, how did you
Get into.
first discover that?
So later in life, like I've realized that we're all put here to serve a purpose
Hmm.
for a period of time.
Hmm.
And so I don't know, I was just always into art from the first grade. I had a first grade teacher who really stimulated my interest in art. I had a cousin who used to draw comic book characters and Bruce Lee. And I was very, 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 I used to like always try to model myself after what he was doing. Around the fourth grade, Beat Street came out, and I instantly identified myself with the character in the movie Ramo, the graffiti artist. And by fifth and sixth grade, I just really knew that art was the thing that made me happy. I realized that also in being able to do it, that I was different.
Hmm.
That uh, I learned at an early age that artists were different in some capacity. I didn't know how or why. I just knew it was.
Hmm.
And that's just all I ever focused on. I can't sing, I can't dance, I can't dribble a basketball, but I go to war when it comes to art because
That's
that's
tight.
all I. So in my course of life, in my journey, I began to learn that art was given to me as a tool,
Hmm.
for the time that I'm here on earth. So graphic design and logos and album covers and stuff like that, that's cool. But my purpose and what I do with my art is much larger than that. And I
Absolutely.
learned that and I try to fulfill that.
And when you say it's much larger than that, why is it much larger than that?
Because I learned at an early age that there's a way to communicate through art that you can't through sometimes music or even verbal communication. And what I started to learn is that the things that I would create would motivate and inspire people in ways that other things didn't.
Mm.
And when I started to pay even more attention to that, more specifically when I was around children, going to schools, talking to kids about, creative careers, I realized that they woke up and they livened up when I was in the room, or when me and my art partners were in the room. I realized that they weren't interested in the firemen and the doctors and the policemen and all that stuff. I realized that through art, I have a way to motivate and inspire people that others can't. And
Yeah.
so when I go talk to kids, when I do a lot of stuff. I work with a lot of community development corporations back home in Cleveland to secure projects. And in those things, I always bring to the forefront the value that art has to motivate, inspire, and educate.
Tight.
And I make sure that every space that I'm in where I get a chance to do that, that's what I do.
Yeah, I think that's really tight, and I think that it also speaks to the conversation of why art has been taken out of schools and
Oh,
like
yeah.
that whole. Because I mean that's what fueled me to continue going in my space and my vein of things was like music and like having like band programs and having those programs, and now you see and you hear a lot about how these programs are being eliminated through the school system. So
And that's not by coincidence. The
right,
creative children and creative humans are the defiers of a society that wants to conform us to a box, to be robots, basically. So when you are an artist, you create your own world, you think for yourself, and you don't subscribe to the norm.
hmm,
And therefore, you're a lot less controllable,
hmm,
And I think it has a lot to do with wanting to control the directions, the thought processes of our children coming up. Because I've also always felt that all of us are artists in some capacity. Society, our parents, and our friends motivate and influence it out of us because they teach us, or you're going to be a starving artist, or all these different concepts that don't apply now because artists are rock stars now.
right,
You
right,
got people selling art for an astronomical amount of money and whatnot. So I
yeah.
think that is removed to control how people process their thoughts. Creative thinkers are pretty rebellious.
No, I think I couldn't agree more. So let's talk about you moving to. Well, before that,
Hmm.
you in Cleveland were a part of a graffiti crew that I
Right.
think is tight, like to hear about because you don't really hear about like graffiti crews necessarily. Like people still tagging the city,
Hmm.
with their like unique tags and everything. But like you growing up, and especially you not talking about like those uh B-boy movies and like things that you were able to see the dance crazes and like what was happening in hip hop
Right.
as you were growing up. Graffiti was a big part of that space as well.
Major part. Major
Yeah.
part. So, I was into graffiti. I was writing on the school bathrooms around about sixth grade. So when I started my career in vandalism. When I got to seventh, eighth grade, we used to ride the red lines to train in Cleveland, and there was an artist that we were exposed to. His name was Sano,
Mhm.
and Sano was a member of a crew called DEF, Doing Everything Funky. So we used to cut school. We used to do all kind of stuff just to ride back and forth on these trains to see these pieces.
Mhm.
So around when we got to high school, we had me and another one of my partners who I was in junior high with. We had a chance meeting with Sano crossing past his locker, and he asked us if we wanted to paint a wall, and we was like, "Yeah, we'll paint a wall. That's cool." But after the locker closed and we went out to school, man, we was like kids in the candy store. It was like, "Damn, Sano want us to paint." So Sano was and is to this day the graffiti legend in the city. He raised a whole lot of artists, me being one of them. And our crew transitioned to the Cleveland Scribe Tribe, which is the moniker that we go by today, with Sano still being the person that we revere for bringing that together. And it was a very valuable experience because when you're a young black artist, you ain't connected with nobody. Your family don't know what you're doing, why you're doing it, what this stuff, all these colors and characters. But this guy was very integral in our lives. And even more so because during the time he was dealing with his own family trauma, like some real serious family trauma. So for this guy to take all these kids under his wing was became historic.
Yeah.
So that's really what lended itself to me being the artist that I am. He taught us everything: how to airbrush, how to markers, how to still paint, uh, how to expropriate art supplies, and on down to technique. And so that graffiti crew is really what shaped the foundation of who I am today. So as of today, we are still connected. Since I've been home in Cleveland, I've orchestrated about 5 mural
Wow.
projects, and he lives in LA, and I brought him back for 2 or 3 of those.
That's tight.
I find it very important to show my appreciation through putting money in his pocket because without him, I wouldn't be the person that I am.
Yeah.
And then he has a family and kids, and so if I have access to opportunities, I wanted to provide that to him and my crew because that was a very, very important to my childhood growing up. I went to art school and all that. I learned nothing from them like I learned from him, even to this day.
You went on to art school.
Yeah, that was mandatory in
Like
my
family,
household.
yeah.
Yeah, like you going to somebody's school. But I knew by that time that I didn't want to go to a 4 year school because I didn't do all that stuff in high school for free.
Mhm.
I graduated with just under a C average. I got out, right? But I was only interested in art. If I had to go to school, I only wanted to do that. So I ended up going to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, where I spent 2 years. And even still in that environment, what I learned was harnessed from being around other artists.
Mhm.
That's always been my chief most educational tool as an
How do
artist.
you learn from being around other artists? Because I hear that a lot. Like a lot of times, people say you need to surround yourself with other creative people who are
Yes.
or be in a room with people smarter than you if you're like looking to pick up certain business acumen and things like that, or just having like a variety of different creatives around you. Why do you think that like fuels you or like motivates you to be the best creative you are?
Well, let me strip the art away from it. We've always been taught that, you are your surroundings. You are the people. Like, if you want to be a millionaire, you got to be around millionaires. You can't be around people who talk about being a millionaire and then they shoot dice every day
Hmm.
or they are in a basement smoking weed every day. So with art, even more so because art to me is it's a spiritual thing. It's like church for me when I'm around other artists. So this weekend when I come into town, I'm around Maya Bailey, Tukey Carter, the City of Ink crew, and all these young creatives who come to be a part of that because they need that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn by real simple. I'm gonna give you an example. Like I went to go see my OG. His name is Wack. He's an artist out of Chicago. He's one of the most prolific artists of our time. He's my client, my brother, and my comrade. So I went to go see him yesterday, and we not even in the house in the basement for 5 minutes, and he's showing me stuff because he knows that I'm a growing artist, right? And he knows that where my passion is and wanting to, leave a legacy and being a impactful artist. So as soon as we get in, he's showing me techniques to pieces that he's done, which is rare because a lot of people want to hold the secret recipe. But when I walked in, he just gave me so many gems that now I can take back to people who want to learn.
Right.
So it helps you cut through the chase, the energy and the spirit of being around other artists generate conversations where you'll learn business in a conversation, technique in a conversation, and I think it's valuable because you can't do these things. Most artists are introverts, individuals. We stay in the studio and we create, but there's not a lot to learn from staying in that space. And so I think being around other creative people is where you harness your greatness. You learn how great you are, or you learn how great you have to become.
Mm-hmm.
So I not just surrounding yourself with artists, but people who are on a level and greater than you in business, in technical skill, in personality. All of that is valuable as an artist.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about the transition. I know you said you moved to Atlanta because you wanted to work with a Dungeon family, you wanted to
Right.
work with organized noise. So, something you were able to accomplish. But, just talk about that transition coming from Cleveland to Atlanta at the time, why that was really important for you. And I know you were making certain moves, i.e., coming to Patchwork was a cold call,
Yeah.
just out of the,
Straight
straight out of the
Yellow
yellow pages. Right.
Right.
And at the time you could, you could still do that today. We always pick up the phone, but it's just like, social media now and like technology. It just seems like at the time probably was a little bit more difficult to insert yourself into the space if you didn't have
Those tools.
those tools. Yeah.
Very much so. So that's the reason why I moved here because I met Rico Way in July '95 at the last Jack the Rapper, and I got a card. They had just got the Interscope deal, and so I'm in, right. So I'm going home and send these packages. So I'm FedExing because I'm faxing. We used fax machines back in the day. I'm doing all this and I'm not getting the response that I need, and it made me realize that, man, I need to be able to go knock on a door, or I need to be able to run into somebody somewhere. So as my destiny called itself, I ran into Sleepy Brown at Greenbrier Mall, and he invited me to the dungeon. But the reason why that transition was important because I met a friend of mine. So I got back to Cleveland from Pittsburgh in January '95, and I had a goal for myself that I wanted to be involved with all the musical acts. I wanted to do their logos and their cassette covers at the time, right? Throwback for you. And so that led me to a friend, a guy who was running a magazine. It was called Planet Black Magazine. It was a weekly featured insert of a Ohio newspaper called the Calling Post. The Calling Post was black media. It was one of the black media outlets at the time that printed their own newspaper, like they had newspaper presses. So I learned a lot being in that space, but it just wasn't enough. I remember us saying that we wanted to have our hands on everything going on in Cleveland, but we would come to the office, man, our phones would be off, flick the lights would be off. And we realized that we couldn't manifest our goals and our dreams in Cleveland because we were involved in everything when the lights was off.
Right.
So me and my partner, we used to travel going to music conferences. So we were down here in September '96 for some conference. I don't remember what it was. And it was an experience that made us realize that we needed to be in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took one last drive through the city before we went back to Cleveland. And I said, the next time I come to Atlanta, it'll be to find somewhere to live. So we came back in October of '96. We lived at the Days Inn on Northside Drive for a week. We ate Waffle House 2-3 times a day to the point when I moved here, I didn't want to see a Waffle House. and we found somewhere to live. And in November 23rd, 96, we was in Atlanta.
Wow.
And it was necessary because at the time, Atlanta was probably where you wanted to be if you wanted to be connected to any aspects of the music industry.
Which is interesting.
Yeah, and Organized Noise was here.
Right. And that was the goal,
That was
period.
the chief goal. Yeah, that was the goal. Like, I'll move to Atlanta, that's cool, but I'm gonna find Organized Noise.
I feel like I've ran into Sleepy Brown at Greenbrier, actually.
Yeah,
Like,
and it was crazy because I was on my way out and he was on his way in, and I gave him my business card, and he looked at the card. He was like, "This is dope. We looking for somebody to do this type of work." So the very first project I did for them, they were in the process of what am I looking at? Reassembling Society of Soul. So they had this song called Big Hips, and I did an illustration for that. And but I can't mention Organized Noise in that experience without like Sleepy invited me to the dungeon, introduced me to everybody else, and I was embraced. But Dee Dee was very integral because Dee Dee brought me into the business pipeline. You know, she helped me get checks, and she helped me learn like the business aspects of how projects work. And yeah, so these are all reasons why I came to Atlanta because there were no outlets to be able to learn or connect to that in Cleveland. We didn't have any labels. We didn't have any really major studios. Bone Thugs and Harmony was popping at the time, but they had to leave. Most people who make it in Cleveland successfully,
got
they
it.
leave.
Yeah.
You know, they leave because there's no infrastructure really to support the types of dreams that people have.
Right. Even to this day.
Even to this day, I have two artists down here right now. They from Cleveland. When I went back to Cleveland, they were trying to find their way. Mark Bless and Honey, they were Mark is a tattoo artist, and they're both artists. But when I came home, they were familiar with me because they followed the City of Ink movement. So naturally, because of that, they showed me the utmost respect. So I tried to give them whatever tools that I could give them to help them along their way there. Long story short, Mark was like, enough is enough. So he left, and then Honey left, and they ended up down here. But they ended up down here where I left off. So Mark is working with Maya Bailey over at Peter Street Station, and Honey, she is involved with a lot of black female artists here, which is not something you can do back home in Cleveland. And then
Right.
she pierces at City of Ink.
Nice.
So it was a testament. It was proof to me that there's talent in Cleveland who have the determination to become or do something. There are no outlets or no resources.
Right.
And for them to come down here and get into the groove in about a year's time, they got into it. It took me 6 years to get into the groove. Like I met Maya and I met Maya Bailey through Curtis, you know, and I was here 6 years already before I had met them. So the fact that those two came from Cleveland was a testament to me that something is broken there that needs to be fixed or adjusted. You
Right.
know.
Right. Now, you, I would say, or you've said this actually, like you're the chameleon of graphic designers. Meaning that, you know, because I mean, I think that your work has an aesthetic or like, you know, like a feel for your work. You have like your own sort of, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but you have your own aesthetic,
Style,
like
yeah, yeah,
style.
definitely,
That's what it
definitely.
is. And but at the same time, as a graphic artist or designer, you're working for a client.
Right.
So being a chameleon of sorts, whatever the job calls for, you deliver, I think is important.
Yes.
But I want you to speak to why as a graphic designer, because I have a lot of friends who do design work for people, and it may not be like they're artists, but they also do graphic design, right?
Right.
And so just like talk about having clients and what they want and what they say they want versus like what you're giving them what they want, and then they're like, you know, the back and forth of the artist or the client not really even knowing, but you also not trying to push your view of the work. Yeah.
I think really when it comes to the business of art, whether it's selling paintings or graphic design, this is the chief most choke up for most artists because most artists don't. Most of us focus on our technical acumen and being a great artist, and we leave the business aspect to the side. I took it upon myself to learn the business at an early age. So, you know, when I was in the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, they were teaching me how to be a graphic artist, but I was taking classes at a community college to learn how to start my own business. And so I knew that early on that if I work for a company, they're gonna pay me a salary, they're gonna have a client that's gonna pay them $20,000 due to the brand identity, and they're gonna pay me an hourly rate to do that, and I'm not gonna have any ownership or any residual income from that creation. And I'm like, I got to cut out the middleman, and so I took it upon myself to read. I expropriated a lot of books because at the time, like books was 40, 50, $60. Didn't have that as an artist. So I learned the business first. I learned what my value was. I learned the value of projects. I knew that, the value of certain things. And so that's the first thing. And so what happens is artists, because they want to make money off of their talent, they jump into the business pool, not really understanding how to deal with people who don't respect artists, right? Because artists at the low end of the totem pole, like everybody wants what we do, but don't nobody want to pay us for that. So for other graphic artists, it just depends. I think I'm an anomaly, right? Myself and then my brother here, Flux. We are two of the very few creators who can design logos, design album cover projects. We do illustration. We can paint with canvases. We can do murals. We teach men or kids. So that's why I use the moniker visual artist, because I'm all over the place in that space. But what has made me effective in that is that I made it a point to respect each segment. So I'm not a graphic artist who is trying to hustle to get illustration money. I do both of them. And what I find is a lot of graphic artists, because they are eager to get into the business, they jump around. They don't master. Like you have some people who are graphic artists, all they do is logos, and they're billing $15, $16, $20,000 clients to do brand identity. Right. And then you have some people like my homeboy Wack. All he does is murder people on canvases. Right. Like he paint his painting act. He's been painting for over 30, 40, 30 some years, 40 years. So that's his lane. I think artists have to define what it is that they want to do. Because all of it, as a person who does all of it, it's very difficult to do it all. Just to be honest, like some days I don't know if I'm a painter, if I'm a graphic artist, if I'm gonna do a logo, if I'm gonna paint it with on the canvas, or if I'm gonna do it on my iPad. And sometimes that can be conflicting when you have all these creative outlets and energies and things and ways that you want to express.
Right.
But I think the very important thing is for artists to really be honest with themselves, because you can't get all the money if you're not skilled in all those areas, right? So I would advise graphic artists who want to jump into music package design or brand identity to really, really, really study it. Not just the technique of how to create a logo, you find that all over, but I live on YouTube and I watch people who are making $20,000, $30,000 doing logos and stuff like that. And I began to realize I'm not going to attract or get that type of money working in the music industry, because the music industry has a cap on what they want to spend unless you're dealing directly with a label. So that's another one of the benefits that I've been able to have by knowing the business is once I got connected. So I would have, let's take Noontime, like Noonie, and working with Noonie, what he would do, they would prepare artists. Once they got the artist a deal, then Noonie would put me in touch with the art department, and then it's on me from there to be able to talk that language, right? So I learned very early how to talk that language. I learned the value of projects and stuff like that, and I feel like a lot of artists need to do that. Focus on business, focus on mastering the creative thing that you want to do, and allow that to spread into other areas.
Yes. What would you say the first thing you mastered in terms of the different, because I mean you provide a number of services
Right.
under this umbrella, but like what would you say the first thing you were able to master?
Designing flyers, because back home in Cleveland, that was the thing that I did, and then when I moved to Atlanta, designing flyers is really what got me my start when I worked with Patchwork. So Patchwork had Razzcast, Mean Green, and Voodoo, and they would promote these artists. So there's 5,000 flyers per project. So that's 15,000 advertising pieces I got going out.
Right.
So I learned to make that looked the best because that was free advertisement.
Right.
And so I got a lot of inquiries and calls off of, stuff like that.
That's tight. So, I mean, some of your clientele to date, and it's just some, I'm sure you've worked with a number of people and brands, but Beats by Dre was one project that I heard you mention was about 2 years working with them, and then Serena Williams, Interscope, these labels, Ludacris, AEG, which is a live entertainment company. Um, how do you go about, obviously word of mouth, because you just talked about like the flyers and things like that, but like how do you also go about getting your clientele? How do you find that people find you today?
Word of mouth, and today more so social media. But even more importantly, this is what I teach young artists when I talk to them. Relationships is how I got all my work. You know, and even in that process, I jacked up some relationships by not knowing, learning as you go. But there was to this day, there's certain relationships, people who have been with me along that journey, who understood the integrity that I was trying to bring with my work, and the level of creative acumen that I wanted to bring with my work. So relationships are far more important than anything else in this business. And so the reason why I'm here is because I have a 25-year relationship with Patchwork as a studio, and then I have a relationship with Curtis as an individual. I look at him as a big brother, a mentor, and a relationship that I can always depend on if I need to get some insight on how to move. And then again, like with Noontime, I met Noonie real early, and has always looked out. Noonie, Chris Hicks, Noontime have given me opportunities. And I think, the relationships, Dee Dee, and so like with Dee Dee, I made a lot of money with Dee Dee. But when I had to move back home to Cleveland, I remember this moment where Dee Dee had came over to help me, and I was just distraught. I was distraught. I had to leave all of this stuff. And she noticed, her motherly, sisterly instinct kicked in. She noticed that I had to leave the next morning, and I wouldn't. So she was like, bro, we gotta da 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 da. And she got me together, right? And that had nothing to do with the project. That had nothing to do with money. That was the relationship that did that. So relationships are the key thing is up to success to me.
I agree.
Yeah, you can't pay for those.
I mean, just even in terms of like having longevity in this business, like you talk about having that relationship for 25 years. And I think, just all the people that we are able to speak with on this podcast have that in common of being able
Yes.
to remain, not, I don't want to say relevant, but like sustain in the business that is ever changing. Obviously, like technology has changed, and like
Right.
there are a lot more people that are doing the same things. And I don't want to say it's even oversaturated, but it can be, especially in music. So,
Very.
just having worked with people, and we'll talk about like some of these projects, but like UGK,
Hmm.
Pimp C, Razzcast, and being able to live solely on this creativity. Have you had another job? Like, have you had to get another job in between
So what's
working?
interesting? Okay, so when I graduated from the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, I got home, and they tell you, oh, when you graduate, we're gonna place you with a job, and so they placed me at this job. It was bogus, and so one day the lady who my supervisor, she put me to the side. She was like, I saw your portfolio. I think you are extremely talented. She's like, I want to be honest with you. There's no room for you to grow here. She's like, some people end up here from the art institutes, and they're here for like 2, 3 years before they figure out what they want to do. I was like, oh, this is a graveyard. So I quit because that wasn't what I was doing. That's not why I took the community college class. So I quit. Then when I moved down here to Atlanta, I got a job. So the first year, it was just first 2 years was hustle and grind. Going into the second year, I got linked up with a temp agency called Mac Temps at the time. And what they did was they placed creative professionals into job scenarios. So I got a job. They was paying me $18.50 an hour. I lived in Riverdale at the time. I had to drive all the way to Alpharetta to Vanity Fairs. So it was 45 minutes one way, 45 minutes back. And I did that for like 3 months. And I did nothing there. Like I sat there and I was making just free money.
Right.
But I would get home and it was developing a complacency that I didn't move to Atlanta for. So I
Right.
quit because I didn't move to Atlanta to get a check. I had like it was get rich or die trying, or meet organized noise or die trying, or tap into this or die trying. So I quit those things and I focused on my talent and my survival skills. And I haven't had a job since '97.
Wow.
Really, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's speaks to, just being like your relationships, but also just being able to, be to handle your business enough to solely sustain on your creativity, which a lot of people aren't able to do, especially not like for that long. So
Right, right.
I wanted to ask you that.
And it's, don't get it twisted. It's definitely been a roller coaster ride. Some rock bottom moments. Some times where it was crackers and tuna for a few weeks. I worked for uh, uh, an elder who I respect and I learned a lot for. His name was Rudolph Terry. He owned a company called Terry Manufacturing.
Mhm.
Him and his brother were very important and instrumental in me learning a lot. But one thing he said to me one time, he is like, if I'm eating steak and shrimp, you eating steak and shrimp. If I'm eating peanut butter and jelly, you might not be eating at all. And I understood what he was saying. He, in essence, as long as he had it and got it, he would take care of me. And that's a principle that I apply in, when I connect with people,
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. Uh, so I mean, even beyond just like the creativity and like, or in what you talked about with Miss Didi is important too. Just like you've been trusted with designing for projects outside of just like the scope of a book cover or like flyers and things like that. Even to your relationship with Curtis, designing the I want to say the funeral program for
Right.
his late wife. So why do you think that people value your relationship and entrust you with certain things like that are personal outside of just working, because like we can hire anybody to do a project, but like why do people
And to
entrust
me,
you? Yeah.
because I'm real and my spirit and the integrity of the energy I bring into a space is genuine and it's divine, and people are attracted to that.
Hmm.
And it's not to say that every space that I walk into, everybody connects to that or respects or values that. I know Curtis does. I know Maya and Tuki does. I know my brother Newface does. I know a lot of people who do. And so, also with that, I knew that when Curtis came to me with that, and that it was a responsibility. That was a ball that I've dropped a lot of balls in my career, right? I messed up on some stuff, but when Curtis come, I don't never drop a ball. Even if I gotta disown my mama for a couple of days because of the relationship. So when he came to me with Chelsea's funeral program, I was honored to be able to do it. And then he came back. Again, his neighbor's daughter had passed. And then he came back again when little Marlon had passed. So I think it's just he trusts that I'm gonna get it done. It's gonna look good, and then I'm not treating it as just a business project. Like my spirit and soul goes into that, and I
Yeah,
think that's why.
absolutely. And I mean, why do you even think that, being like you as a person reflects in your work? Like, and when you talk about like having these relationships with people,
Mhm.
we talk about this all the time on the podcast, like having real relationships and sustaining the relationships and whatever. But it's
Right.
like, what does that look like, and why or how do you? Is it the way that people vibe with you? Is it like is it you checking up on people when it's
Right.
not about the work, like those sorts of things, and giving advice to people who because a lot of times we have like all these events around the city. Like I see my people all the time, but it's just a difference in like my relationship with certain people
Oh
and
yeah.
just like meeting them and like what does that even lead to?
Well, see, like in the entertainment industry, we have to speak to the facade that comes with that, all of that, because a lot of relationships aren't real.
Right.
They exist because there's something to gain at the
Hmm.
moment. Um, I had something to bring to Patchwork, and it was accepted. And what I got in return was a family vibe and love from BJ. Shout out to Clay, because BJ and Clay, when I first came to Patchwork, held me down. They made sure that I was working and doing things. But I think that you're gonna have that, especially in the industry where people are looking to use whoever they can to get what they need. And I think for me is, again, I can't really speak to anything because your energy precedes the room. Like you can. verbally lie to somebody. You can even your actions can even be deceptive. But after a while, the energy reveals itself, and you can't mask that. So I think just it has a lot to do with attraction. I try to put out what I want in return.
Hmm.
You know, when I realize that I'm in a space where I'm putting out and I'm not getting that reciprocated, then I just got to cut ties
Yeah.
because now we're dealing with, what I call energy vultures. And that's a real deal. People who drain your spirit and your energetic essence. Um, and I focus more on the people who reciprocate the the energy, and that's the only way I can really um, say it is like some mystical force or something. But not everyone leads or enters the room that way.
Right.
Like some people enter the room with what they want, what they need, or what they demand, and over a course of time, that energy it becomes prevalent, and you have a decision whether you want to interact with that or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was something you spoke to about social media, or just like how social media is a tool at this point to, showcase your work. But I am curious, as a creative, as someone who, I'm sure you value your own art as much as the next person that's, able to view it and appreciate it.
Right.
But how do you feel as an artist putting your stuff on social media or putting your art on social media? Because you know what I mean? I know you've
I
had
know
that
exactly what you
conversation with
mean.
other artists too.
Well, my OG Whack right now is he dealing with a situation where somebody is bootlegging one of his pieces, and so that's always the thing. I would want to pull up and knock on a door or something,
Right.
but it's just difficult to manage, and that comes with greatness. I read a book called Unlabeled by Mark Echo, and at Mark Echo's height, he was talking about how he went to Japan, he went somewhere overseas, and they had a whole Mark Echo store with all his stuff, and he wasn't seeing a dime from that, right? So when it comes to social media, it's a gift and a curse, but I think it's ultimately it's where we are if you want to connect with people.
Yeah.
And there's different strategies you can implement, like you can bait people on on Facebook, Instagram, and drive them to your site to see. But for me, I like sharing. I like sharing the process. I like sharing the thought process, where I'm at mentally when I'm doing these things. I find that this is how I connect with people.
Yeah.
A lot of people love the finished piece on the wall, right? They love, coming, showing up and seeing the piece on the wall. But a lot of people are a lot more invested in the blood, sweat, and the tears in the creation process. They want to know. And then I get a lot of DMs or inquiries like, how did you do this? Or how do you do that? So by sharing that on social media, I think it's important I think it contributes to growing a more healthier art community. But then you got, bums and lazy fools who are exploitive and they want to steal the work. So I think like the things that I cherish the most, or maybe if it's something I'm working on for a client, I don't share. But for the most part, I think it helps to connect with community. I'm gonna give you an example. Another one of my OGs is an artist here, Charlie Palmer. He's currently in South Africa.
Nice.
He hit me on the DM. He was like, "Yo, I'm in a store and I'm taking this guy's, giving this guy my IG, and he saw your name, and he said, 'Oh wow, you know Mr. Soul.'" So Charlie felt compelled to share that with me that some guy from South Africa who I've never seen before, don't know who he is, was following me, and he was a big fan of my work. And the irony that Charlie ran into him. So the dude DMs me and says, "Hey man, your friend Charlie was in town. I just wanted to let you know that I really love your art and blah 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 blah."
Yeah.
So he could connect. So if I go to South Africa, where you think I'm going?
Right. You about to connect with my man.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where social media is valuable because the whole City of Ink movement was born from MySpace. Like we gained our national and even international awareness through
MySpace.
MySpace.
Wow.
Boy, MySpace was
It
jumping for us.
was.
Yeah.
So, what's your role in like building with City of Ink? Like, I mean, I know you met Maya through Curtis here, and like, that relationship's formed from there. But like, how did you find yourself fitting in? Because I mean, do you tattoo?
I do not do tattoos, and everybody always think I do tattoos.
I mean, it's just like you're in an environment with all the artists. So I'm curious to know, like, what your role was with that
That
brand and that business. Obviously, City of Ink has grown to be what it is today, but
right.
you were there from the beginning.
Yeah, so I met in 2002. I remember we were in the parking lot. I had a T-shirt on that I drew, and Curtis was like, "Yo, that's dope. I know somebody who will eat that up, though." I was like, "Shit, you need to get them on the phone." So the person he dialed up on the phone was Maya Bailey. So he came in the phone. We talked real briefly. So I'm like, "Shit, where you at?" I'm about to pull up, and he was about 7 minutes away. So I went over there. I showed him my portfolio and what I did, vice versa, and then we just vibed out and connected. So he was like, "Well, we building this shop on MLK and Peachtree. Come through." So I came through. Then I just kept coming through, and I just bum rushed the show. I just showed up. But the reason why I kept showing up because I'm here 6 years, and I hadn't met a collective of young black artists who were as exceptionally talented as I was. So I just kept coming through. So that was that shop. Then from there, we went to Trinity and Peachtree. And in this process, relationships are developing. But I'm just showing up
Hmm.
because I'm enthused about the energetic space that I'm into now. So I just kept showing up, showing up. Then we did Mitchell Street, which lasted for about a year. And then after Mitchell Street, Maya sat me down and he said he had a vision for City of Ink. And he had a vision for what he wanted the logo to look like. So we smoked some weed and bam, a
Got
couple
to work.
hours later, logo was done. All the branding was done, and the majority of the branding was done in that session because that's the benefit of being around other creatives, right? And so from that, it was just adding brick by brick on the foundation. And so my role that I play, even though I don't do tattoos, I was always responsible for making sure that the tattoo shop branding, that was
Hmm.
my thing. I knew how to, we didn't have $1 million, but I knew how to make us look like $1 million. And I think that attracted other people to the brand because no other tattoo shops at the time were branding themselves the way we were or
Right.
doing the things that we were doing. Flash forward to now, I think the role that I play is, you know, lending my energy and my spirit. Considers me a big brother, even though I consider him a little big brother based off of the things that he's doing.
Hmm.
But really, more than anything now is just playing whatever role is required to play because I'm in Cleveland, so there's only so much that I can do. But when I come back to the city for our anniversary show, we just celebrated 13 years.
Yes, congrats.
Thank you. And I just play whatever role I need to play.
Hmm.
There are no titles. There are no. It's like get in where you fit in. I think that contributes to the growth and success of the shop. Like we just all had compartments and pieces that we can put onto this puzzle, and everybody did that.
Hmm.
Tuki is exceptionally well with breaking artists in and building them up to be the best technical tattoo artists that they can be. Maya is his acumen is business and being a visionary. I brought branding to the table, and then there were Corey Davis is also a visionary who went and started City of Ink Edgewood,
Hmm.
and so all these things we did, we didn't learn this from nobody. We learned from being amongst each other and started to learn ways that we can contribute more to the brand to grow it to as big as it could become. Um, so I also have me and Maya discuss creative ideas and stuff like that. So and then we have some long term projects that we want to work on as well that I'll be a part of.
Nice. Um, can you talk to me about like one of your favorite projects to date? Because I don't want to like harbor on like one particular thing, but like just one of your favorite, maybe even clients that you've worked with was like a
Well, that's hard. So I will say, so I speak about organized noise all the time, so I won't mention them. I think y'all got that part. I met Pimp C through a brother. His name was Hashim Nzinga. I met Hashim through doing volunteer work with the youth task force. That was something that I did when I came to Atlanta. I had met somebody who had a youth organization. So at the time, I was being presented an award for my work, and Hashim was there. The late Dr. Khalid Muhammad, rest in peace, he was there. And at the time, Hashim had just got linked up with UGK. So he called me out of the blue. I remember it was December. I don't remember what year. He's like, "You familiar with a rap group named UGK?" I was like, "Hell yeah." He was like, "Okay, I'm gonna hook you up with them." I was like, "Okay." Now at this time I didn't really know Hashim, but I also knew that people who did things in the industry would also say stuff that they didn't really mean. And then one day he called me and told me to come over to the house. And so my first project with them was redesigning their business cards. But I would say Pimp C because he was a character, um, but he was genuine. Like he was one of those people who you would think would be on some high capping type shit, but dude always showed the utmost respect. And there. So I had an opportunity to go on a couple road trips to some shows. I had a couple of opportunities to go hang out at the house with him and experience him as Chad Butler. Um, and he made sure that whatever I worked on, I was taken care of. Right. I remember when I worked on the Pimpilation project, he was still locked up, and when he got out, he came to Patchwork. Patchwork was one of his first stops, and I remember him asking, "Did they take care? Did they get you straight?" And I was like, "Well, I had some hiccups, but Mama took care of it for me because Mama also was somebody that I met through that organization through UGK who was also genuine, and looked out." So I would say Pimp C. And so through that, I had an opportunity to work on a couple projects. And then Julia Beverly gave me a call. And not only did she reach out for me to do the book cover, but she actually incorporated a lot of my story and my interaction with Pimp C and artwork in the book. So that was an honor as well. But Pimp C is definitely, hands down, a very, very special client. Like, is one of the realest guys. An honorable mention also is Baby D. I met Baby D. He found me, and we met at Spin for lunch to talk about what he wanted to do. And I got into explaining. He was like, "I already did my research." And another client who he came correct. He showed the utmost respect. And so projects like that, I just feel like I'm gonna give whatever I have to give in those scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also talks to you, or it just speaks to, you know, developing that relationship from the beginning and continuously being called on to do, once you do great work, people always come back to you. So
Right.
I think that's tight. And it's cool to look over your journey. I'm excited for what you can do being back in Cleveland too, because I think it's important to cultivate that community.
Very.
And then what you continue to do here in Atlanta with City of Ink and just your overarching brand. So you still call it Visual Soul?
No,
No.
because as when you're young, you do stuff and you don't do everything that you're supposed to do. So when I was operating as Visual Soul, I was doing artwork for Patchwork, and so I was doing like these ads and rap pages and stuff like that. So my name and my brand was getting out, but I didn't trademark it nationally. I did a statewide copyright, and what happened was some bum in St. Louis stole my swag, so
Dang.
he took the name. And I couldn't use it anymore. But it was like I felt the way about it, but it was a learning experience, and it was also a point for me to redefine who I was. But Mr. Soul is forever.
Facts. Well, I'm happy you learned the lesson from there, and I mean, just to the people listening, to make sure you trademark your things and copyright your things.
The business, learn the
Learn
business.
the business. Now, I have to describe like the feeling of your work and just like when we talked about it briefly in earlier in the conversation of just like it's very visually it all ties together in my opinion. Like from what you did from the Pimp C book cover to like even what's on your hoodie today. But there's one thing that I have to mention that Curtis actually brought up is just like this the Black Angels like not being something that we saw before, but now
Right.
you've put an imprint on that. Can you tell us about?
Well, and then I haven't even dug in the way I intend to, but you know, so I was raised like most black kids. We was raised in some form of a Christian household, and that was our experience and exposure to spirituality.
Mhm.
Around 14, 15, I started learning, stuff. that we weren't taught, and it caused me to dig deeper and search into things. And what I realized is that there was a very, very low representation as black people as spiritual beings. In all the books, all the murals, everything you see, everything is white. Jesus white, he ain't white. Angels white, who knows if they white. But everything is just white. And it's a testament to the society that we live in that we already know about. You know, I embraced consciousness at a very early age. You know, so I was into Malcolm X, I was into Fred Hampton, I was into the Panthers, I was into the Black Liberation Army, I was into everybody who was putting their life on the line to create a better representation of who we are. And so when I started to realize that, you know, the imagery in the spiritual realm, you know, I love Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, but it ain't one black angel in that thing that I've seen. So as an artist, this is the power that we have, is to define our own narrative, whether it's visual art, audio art, spoken word, we can define our own narratives. So I started drawing angels as little black kids with nappy hair, black women, and as studies though, just as like we need to, what would this look like, you know? And I thought it was important because when you're talking about the mentality and mind state of young children growing up, they want to see themselves reflected in these spaces, and for us to put so much emphasis on the church and on religion, on spirituality, and have us not reflected in that, I think it's a travesty. I also think it's the reason why a lot of people disconnect, because they don't see themselves within that. So the black angels represent, at the end of the day, just showing us in a spiritual, divine light, showing us as the people that we are, you know. And it's also an act of balance, because our culture promotes so much negativity, you know, disrespect for women and ourselves, that I just thought that it would be a good counter to, you know, some of the things. So the response that I've gotten has been pretty good, because other people echoed that sentiment, you know, like, you know, we definitely do need to see ourselves in a more spiritual light. So a lot of those studies that I've started, I'm in the process of turning into t-shirts, because you know, I've been working on a t-shirt brand, just as not to sell a million shirts, or, you know, to go platinum selling shirts, but because I know that t-shirts are another avenue for me to communicate. And then I can communicate through these images, through these angels, through these characters, without the middleman, a client determining whether it's good enough or not. And so the angels represent my way of just showing us that we are a lot bigger than what we perceive ourselves to be, or even promote ourselves to be. Like, we are the creators of civilization. We are creators of mathematics and science. And you know, if you look back to anything first, it was us. And so I feel like, you know, for the angel to have such a tremendous representation on, you know, God's workers or messengers, then we should be in that conversation and that visual as well.
Absolutely. I'm happy you touched on that. Oh, I'm excited to see what else you create. I'm excited to see the t-shirts. I'll be happy to support that. Yeah. Are there any other new projects you're looking forward to before we?
So when I go back home to Cleveland, I'm kind of nervous about it, but it's an excited nervousness. So I'm doing a screening of a documentary that we shot. I hired my brother Artemis Jenkins, who documents everything we do at City of Ink. I knew that, you know, one day when I got a budget to pay him his worth, that I wanted him to document something. So I got my first real big ass project, and it was a mural that we did for the community college, the downtown Metro campus.
Nice.
And it's a 56-foot by 9-foot wall that we painted in a week. We averaged about 2 hours of sleep a day. But AJ documented this whole process. And so we have a 10-minute documentary that I've partnered with the community college with to do a screening and to do a panel discussion. So I'm very
Nice.
excited about that, because it's to me, it's more than just doing a piece of art and putting it on the wall.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity for me to show my ability to get people in the room to have a conversation about the art and the impact of the art. So that And I'm working on pieces for a solo art show that, I will do in Cleveland because I think Cleveland needs that from me,
Yeah.
but also to do here because I need to do that here.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I got some creative stuff going on. I'm still all over the place, still trying to find myself in Cleveland. I'm only 3 years back. It's a lot of politics involved with the art community there,
Hmm.
so I was weeding through a lot of that stuff. But I'm just excited to live life and to be able to connect with people who want to hear what I have to say. Because what I've been learning being back home in Cleveland, my artistic reach is not limited to just the pen and the pad. It's how I'm able to articulate the experience and the value. So I'm just excited to be able to do that and motivate and inspire some people to be the greatest artists that they can be.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited for you, Mr. Soul. Make sure that, you guys follow him. Tell him where they can find you on social media.
I am on Instagram at Mr. Soul, spelled out MisterSoul 216. 216 is for Cleveland. I am also that on Twitter, but I don't tweet. And you can see my portfolio at www.mrsoul216, MisterSoul216.com. But Instagram is my choice platform to connect with people. So, check out my stories and check out my content and feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sitting down with us. As always, you guys can find this podcast at IDM Podcast on social media, as well as myself on all platforms, Sammy approved.
Hey,
Thank you.
thank you, Sammy.
Sonically superior.